For us to grasp what likely went on between Jeffrey and his mother Joyce in those early years, we need to both take into account the way he presented with his public versus private persona, as well as incorporate object relations theory. In the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, we see a man who is so clearly able to vacillate intensely between the public persona of this meek, gentle, shy, withdrawn person who wouldn't hurt a fly, and the private persona who would drug, necrophile, and cannibalize his victims. Object relations theory contends that the infant's relationship with the mother or primary caregiver, usually the mother, deemed as the object, predominantly determines the formation of the infant's personality in adult life. This theory postulates that the mother or object continues to impact us well past our childhood into adulthood because we internalize them. They live on forever within us, almost like a hardwired computer or blueprints. One critical thing to understand about this process: we do not internalize who our mother actually was in reality, but instead we internalize a very subjective version of her. And so some would say that the internalized version of the object is a mixture between fantasy and reality. If we look at the case between siblings, for example, like Jeffrey and David, it could appear to each of them like they had two very different childhoods, and arguably they did, given the fact that Jeffrey was alone with Lionel and Joyce for the first 6 years, and Jeffrey was therefore a cushion for David when he came into the world, as older siblings often are. This could explain why most notorious serial killers are firstborns. According to Donald Winnicott, a prolific object relations theorist, central to being a functioning adult, one must learn to tolerate uncomfortable inner states and emotions and learn how to regulate those. Winnicott calls into question the concept of what a normal child looks like. He asks, does he just sleep and eat and drink and smile sweetly? No, he says. That is not what a normal child looks like. A normal child pulls out all the stops, throws tantrums, challenges, because this child feels a safety in the fact that I can express these feelings inside of me, and you, meaning the parents, are able to tolerate these feelings. In the course of time, the child tries out his power to disrupt, to destroy, to frighten, to wear down his parents. Ideally, the child is in an environment that is full of love and acceptance with consequence tolerance, where the child therefore does not wind up becoming too afraid of his own thoughts, of his own inner imaginings, and this will help him progress in the emotional development realm. A critical factor here is the attunement that the primary caregiver, typically the mother, has with her child. And good enough attunement would be where the child's expressing something and the mother is mirroring back or attuned with the child with regards to that expression. When a mother responds in a reassuring way to the baby's facial expressions with her own feelings, the baby learns that it is safe for it to express itself completely exactly as it feels. Through this attunement, the baby gets a sense that it exists in the world and has impact, and thereby develops what is called a true self. If, however, the mother does not respond to the baby with proper attunement because she's depressed or on drugs or absent, or the baby experiences an environment that is overwhelming or unsafe, the child learns it is not safe to express itself authentically. Sadly, all of those innate feelings within the child wind up getting repressed or defended against, and the child thereby develops what is called a false self. This is indicative of individuals we see who are excessively appeasing or compliant, anticipating other people's needs and fulfilling them, aimed at getting some kind of positive response from the absent caregiver. And this winds up leaving an individual with a perpetual sense of emptiness inside, a feeling that Dahmer has stated he felt throughout his life. There were two Jeffreys. There was the public Jeffrey that everyone saw, again, as this meek and sweet, compliant person who experts treated and found to be empathic and accountable. And then there was the other Jeffrey, the one who lived in the fantasy world. This is the private version of Jeffrey Dahmer. This is the version where his fantasy world completely overtook him, where there is no differentiating between himself and another person, between his own dark, selfish needs and the other person's life. The other is merely seen as an object in the fantasy whose main function is there for Jeffrey's pleasure and nothing else. When I think about Jeffrey Dahmer and the only time he reports feeling fulfilled when it comes to connection with others, I think about the dynamic of a child with a passed out mother. If you imagine a child who is desperate for attunement, is desperate for connection, is desperate for some level of mirroring, and if you have a mother who is passed out on drugs often, and the child is left alone with that mother for hours and hours, the child learns that what it means to be in that dynamic is crawling up on top of her body, maybe listening to her heart, but nuzzling up against her warm body, which is why, by the way, he never wanted them dead, because once they grew cold, he could no longer feel close to them. Arguably, the fantasy version of Jeffrey Dahmer, the Mr. Hyde, if you will, the one that comes out in private, is the real Jeffrey Dahmer. And the split version of him, the other side, the false self, the public self, is a defense that he himself believes in, and that's where it gets confusing. This false self, I believe, was a direct development of not only lack of attunement with mother due to her drug use and her depression, but also due to the violent environment that he was exposed to, and which probably caused Joyce to not be as in tune with him as she could have been. I do believe that it is possible that this zombie-like state that Jeffrey fetishized was connected to his mother being in a zombie-like state on drugs while he was in the dominant position. Speaking of dominate, our next video, we're going to touch on Jeffrey as a child and his relationship with his father, Lionel. And then we're going to move on to discussing reactive attachment disorder, which I think was likely a direct result from Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood. Stay tuned.